So hello and welcome to another episode of Biographics. I'm your interim host, Carl Smallwood, and today we're talking about Gene Roddenberry, war hero, policeman, and creator of Star Trek. Original article by Arnaldo Teodrani. Science fiction may not be your cup of tea, or coffee in this case, and it's very hot, but for the sake of the bit, I'll take a sip. Ow. But you may have heard of a certain intellectual property called Star Trek. You may have never watched an episode, but its presence in popular culture is so pervasive that you may have picked up on it as a character with pointy ears and extras wearing red shirts that always get shot. If you're indeed a fan of Star Trek, you may also know that its creator was credited as one of the most visionary authors of the entire genre. But only hardcore Trekkies, which apparently doesn't include me because I only watch TNG, Picard's better than Kirk, come at me in the comments. You may not be familiar with the man's life story, one that involved life-threatening adventures and serial seduction, worthy of his lead character, Captain Kirk. This is the long and prosperous life of Gene Roddenberry, decorated war veteran, civil aviation hero, police officer, and creator of Star Trek.
Live long and prosper.
And I'm hoping there are a lot of Trekkie references in this video, and let us know in the comments how many of them you spot, and I'm going to try and look out for them myself as well.
Good luck.
Eugene Wesley Roddenberry was born August 19th, 1921 in El Paso, Texas, the first child of Eugene, Edward, and Caroline. In 1923, the Roddenberrys moved to California, where Dad Eugene joined the Los Angeles Police Department. After graduating from Franklin High School in February 1939, Gene followed his father's example and signed up for the police science program, Los Angeles City College, or LACC. Apparently, he was quite dedicated to this career path as he served as president of the LACC Police Club. But during his college years, Gene found two new passions: exploration and flying. Well, technically three passions actually: exploration, flying, and a young, attractive lady called Eileen Rexroat. What does that say? No, Rexroat. Eileen Rexroat. Of the three, the most consuming one was his love of flying. Gene even considered dropping police sciences and enrolling in aeronautical engineering instead. This dilemma was solved by the intervention of a greater force in the skies, one whose calling Gene could not resist: the US Army Air Corps, or USAAC. By early 1940, World War II had been raging in Europe and Asia. In preparation for a conflict, the Air Corps had begun launching the civilian pilot training program to replenish their ranks. This was the perfect occasion for the young Gene to learn to fly. He first earned a civilian pilot's license and then joined the USAAC in December 1941, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor. After being commissioned as a second lieutenant, or lieutenant, do you Americans pronounce it lieutenant? I've heard some people pronounce it lieutenant. I'm going to say lieutenant because that's just how I've always pronounced it. Gene was transferred to Kelly Field in San Antonio, Texas. There, on June 20th, 1942, he married his college sweetheart, Eileen. The two would go on to have two daughters, Barbara Anita and Dawn Allison. But for the time being, they could not spend much time together. It was time for Gene to boldly go and serve in the war. By December 1942, 2nd Lieutenant Roddenberry had been assigned to the 394th Squadron, flying a B-17 bomber in the Pacific Theater. Gene was the co-pilot's crew commander, Lieutenant Ripley, who had christened their plane Los Lobos. Among others, the crew included Engineer Staff Sergeant Scotidus, whom we hope Gene called Scotty. Trekkies, we'll get that. On January 14th, Gene, Ripley and the crew were sent on their first bombing mission against a Japanese destroyer, but the B-17 could not score a single hit. 2 days later, Gene joined another mission, a nighttime raid against an enemy base on Bougainville Island. The first part of the mission was a success, but then Gene's craft and the 3 other B-17s were attacked by Zero fighter planes. Gene's crew did not back down from the fight, and they downed at least one enemy plane during the ensuing skirmish. Throughout February, Los Lobos performed mainly sea search missions, largely uneventful except for one occasion when a massive storm almost caused Gene's B-17 to plunge into the ocean. Bad weather hampered the crew's operations throughout late April and early May 1943, when bombing raids over Bougainville resumed. On the night of May 13, Gene and his Lobos joined a force of 9 bombers against Khalil and Bray. The strike force attacked at night, dropping flares to illuminate their targets. This tactic also made them more visible to enemy anti-aircraft fire, but the B-17s managed to return in one piece. On May 20th and May 23rd, Roddenberry and crew struck at Bougainville once again, distracting Japan defences while the US Navy mined the enemy harbour. On June 15th, the 394th Squadron was relocated to Fiji for some well-earned rest. There, Gene learned that he'd been promoted to pilot and was assigned his own B-17, promisingly named the Croco Crap. Roddenberry and his Croco Crap flew their first strike mission on July 8, 1943. The attack was aborted at the last moment though due to severe bad weather. 3 days later, Roddenberry was assigned another craft, the Yankee Doodle, and this time managed to drop a load of fragmentation bombs over Kahili. On July 13th, Gene conducted another successful mission over Kahili as his B-17 destroyed a Japanese anti-aircraft battery. The Yankee Doodle crew were then relocated to Espiritu, Santo Island for a period of R&R and routine sea search missions. On August 2nd at 6 AM, Yankee Doodle was gaining speed on the runway, ready for takeoff. But there was a problem with the engine, and Gene realised immediately that the plane was not gaining enough speed for a takeoff. He hit the brakes, but the Yankee Doodle continued to roll along the airstrip. The thick jungle at the end of the strip approached menacingly. Gene ordered his co-pilot to unlock the tail wheel, a manoeuvre which may have prevented disaster, but the lever controlling the wheel malfunctioned. Because of course, right out of Star Trek here. All they could do was brace for impact as Yankee Doodle slammed into a wall of dense vines and tree stumps. As the B-17 caught fire, Gene and most of the crew made it out alive, but Sergeant Kruger and Lieutenant Wallum had already died in the impact. Lieutenant Gene Roddenberry was exonerated from any fault by the official report on the accident. Nonetheless, he was badly shaken by the experience. By the end of August, he and other veterans of the 394th Squadron were transported back to San Francisco, where Gene was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. Throughout the assignment to the Pacific, Gene had found time to practice his budding creative talent, penning poems, short stories, and even some song lyrics. Once repatriated, he was able to hone his skills even further. He was given a non-combat role. He was in charge of investigating airplane crashes for the USAAC. At the end of the war, he was honorably discharged with the rank of captain and entered civilian life, working as a commercial airline pilot for Pan Am. In the breaks between flying passengers, he continued to write short stories and poems, and even enrolled in writing classes at Columbia University. Then, on June 18th, 1947, he survived another disastrous crash. Gene was aboard Pan Am Flight 121, flying from Calcutta to New York. The plane made a stop at Karachi, Pakistan, and left at 3:37 p.m. local time. Roddenberry was relieved from co-piloting for the next stretch of the journey, and he took a seat amongst the passengers. Some 5 hours after takeoff, one of the engines malfunctioned and stopped working. The captain in charge, Joseph Hart, assessed the situation and decided to push towards Istanbul with only 3 engines. Cruising at 17,500 feet, the engines began overheating, and the craft lost altitude. It's like it's not the 90s era wrestling. Oh God, drink more coffee. The plane soldiered on for another 3 hours until it lost a second engine. The only hope for survival was to crash into the Syrian desert. The hard impact ripped the left wing off the fuselage. The entire plane turned about 180 degrees on the surface of the desert and then continued sliding for some 400 feet. Flight 121 was now a crippled, flaming wreck. Roddenberry, having suffered 2 broken ribs, sprang into action. Aided by 2 flight attendants, Jane Bray and Anthony Volpe, he evacuated the shot passengers as the flames were consuming the plane. The heroic trio calmed down trapped passengers before freeing them and ushering them to safety. Some of the passengers' clothing had caught fire, but Roddenberry smothered the flames using a nearby and quite handy pillow. Roddenberry, Volpe and Bray were able to rescue some 19 passengers, but a sudden change in the wind's direction engulfed the entire wreck. 8 passengers and 7 crew members did not survive the disaster. At dawn, Roddenberry asked 2 of the more able-bodied passengers to cross the Euphrates River and seek help from a nearby Syrian military post. A few hours later, Gene boarded a small Syrian military plane and was flown back to the base and was able to alert Pan Am headquarters. The company dispatched a rescue plane, thus ending the ordeal for the survivors. Roddenberry received a Civil Aeronautics Commendation for his relief efforts during the crash, but decided he'd had enough of flying, and understandably so. On May 15th, 1948, Gene, understandably, resigned from Pan Am. From now on, he would take to writing full-time. Or at least that was the intention. The Roddenberrys relocated to Hollywood, where Gene had decided to try and make a career writing screenplays for the new medium of television. Well, the industry was still, to put it lightly, underdeveloped, and there was little career prospect for a newbie writer. Gene had to pay the bills somehow, so on January 1949, he joined the Los Angeles Police Department, climbing to the rank of sergeant. His stint with the LAPD would prove a valuable foundation for his future career in television. First of all, his policing experiences made for valuable inspiration when writing teleplays, and his superiors noticed his knack for the typewriter, asking him to write speeches for no less an authority than the chief of police. Moreover, while on the force, Gene became friends with Jack Webb, producer and lead actor for popular TV crime series Dragnet, a valuable connection which later eased his entry into Tinseltown. In 1953, producer Frederick W. Ziv hired him as a technical advisor for another drama, Mr. District Attorney. While revising scripts, Roddenberry came to the conclusion that he could do a better job than the current authors. He was right, and in March 1954, he sold his first episode script to Ziv. His superiors gave him permission to moonlight as a freelance writer under the pseudonym Robert Wesley. Hey, Wesley, I get it. Over the next 3 years, Robert Wesley wrote for shows such as the Science Fiction Theatre and Space Patrol. Throughout the entire period, Gene pursued another passion of his, extramarital affairs. I did not see that one coming. Apparently his long-suffering wife, Eileen, had to endure his frequent flings with secretaries employed by the LAPD. A cop cheating on his wife. Who'd have thunk it? Professionally, his writing career was picking up. Finally, in 1956, he had collected enough credits and commissions to leave the police force and become a full-time writer. Continuing to work as a freelancer from 1956 to 1964, Roddenberry wrote for popular shows such as Dragnet, Dr. Kildare, and Have Gun Will Travel. His work on this latter series was particularly praised. He was named head writer, and his episode Helen of Aberdeen won the Writers Guild Award. Raising in status, Roddenberry was able to create and produce his own series, The Lieutenant, set among the ranks of the US Marine Corps. While producing episodes for this series, Gene befriended actors Nichelle Nichols and Majel Barrett. He soon started an affair with both of them, and even tried to convince them to enter into an open relationship. Nichols soon realised that Barrett was truly in love with Gene and ended the affair. Roddenberry's heart may have been torn between Nichols and Barrett, but it truly belonged to science fiction. He was dead set on creating the ultimate sci-fi show, and soon he would achieve this goal. In 1964, Gene started pitching around his idea for a series set in an idealised, optimistic 23rd century set around a brave crew of Starfleet explorers. Star Trek. He attracted the interest of TV legend Lucille Ball and her production company, Desilu Studios, securing around $450,000 to produce a pilot episode, The Cage. This episode starred Jeffrey Hunter as USS Enterprise's Captain Pike. Gene's paramour, Majel Barrett, was cast as Pike's second-in-command, credited as number 1. This pilot also featured Leonard Nimoy as the iconic Mr. Spock, although in a far less prominent role. This episode was deemed too cerebral, yet promising, and Gene set to work to develop a treatment for the series as well as a second pilot. In his rewrites, Pike became Captain Kirk, and Hunter was replaced by William Shatner. Majel Barrett was recast as Nurse Christine Chapel, and Nimoy's Spock took her place as second-in-command. Fighting interference from Network, Roddenberry also cast his former lover and now friend, Nichelle Nichols, in the role of Communications Officer Lieutenant Uhura. NBC eventually broadcast the first episode of Star Trek, titled Man Trap, on September 8th, 1966. Sci-fi aficionados enthusiastically welcomed the show, though it initially garnered a overall mixed response. As the first season progressed, however, ratings improved. NBC were inundated by fan mail, and the network secured a weekly budget of around $500,000 for the show's production. When the second and third season rolled around, ratings floundered once more, but it was largely kept alive thanks to fan writing campaigns. But eventually NBC pulled the plug and shut down the original series in September 1969. So Star Trek, the original series, lasted only 3 seasons and was cancelled after receiving a mixed response. Non-lovers of sci-fi might wonder then why it became such a big deal. The fact is that Roddenberry as a showrunner introduced some truly innovative concepts, not seen on primetime TV before. He depicted a post-scarcity future in which humanity had defeated poverty, war, as well as racial and political differences. For example, at the height of the Cold War, he introduced the character of Ensign Chekov, a friendly Russian. More importantly, he imposed a racially diverse cast in a period where the civil rights movement was still fighting for desegregation. When NBC execs complained about the presence of an African American and Asian characters, Roddenberry replied, and I quote, "If we don't have blacks and whites working together when our civilization reaches the time frame, there won't be any people." William de Uhura was cited as a source of inspiration for many African American girls to pursue careers in science and aeronautics. Her role was so important to the cause of African Americans that when Williams considered quitting the show, she was persuaded to stay by none other than Martin Luther King Jr. himself. Uhura did not leave the Enterprise, and she and Captain Kirk even shared the first interracial kiss ever seen on American screens. And this is where the pub quiz aficionados, I'm going to call you, will like say, well, it wasn't the first interracial kiss. Okay, there's another show before this that did have another interracial kiss, but this is the first well-known one, and it's one of the most important. Producer Alex Kurtzman would later comment positively on Roddenberry's approach to diversity, stating, "Gene Roddenberry's greatest contribution to the conversation of diversity in the future is that diversity is never addressed in Star Trek." More in general, Roddenberry considered his show as a science fiction allegory to deal with social issues typical of the time. The spectre of war, teenage rebellion, racial conflicts, and the injustices in the workplace. Week after week, planet after planet, Kirk, Uhura, Spock, Dr. McCoy, and engineer Scotty tackled these challenges with an optimistic approach, favouring tolerance and rational, non-violent methods. Unless William Shatner was directly involved, in which case it was done BAM! But for the most part, phases were usually set to stun. In parallel to the sci-fi drama unfolding on the screen, Roddenberry was the protagonist of his own little soap opera behind the scenes. While Star Trek was in production, Gene lived his relationship with Majel in the open as they shared a flat near Desilu Studios, but the urges of the showrunner were insatiable, and he collected a string of lovers amongst the young and beautiful actors working for the network. Ande Richardson, an assistant working for NBC, described how Roddenberry insisted that young women in the show fitted with skimpy outfits so he could perv on them. Richardson also reported how Gene loved to overshare about intimate, quirky and depraved encounters, describing them as a freaky deaky dude. Eventually, this freaky deaky dude filed for divorce from his first wife in 1968. Before the process was finalised, he married Majel in a Shinto ceremony held in Tokyo on August 6, 1969. The couple would have a son, Eugene Jr., known as Rod. In addition to negotiating his chaotic love life, Gene had to battle with his own insecurities as a writer. He had a clear vision for Star Trek, which he staunchly defended against studio interference. But in his quest for perfection, he obsessively edited and rewrote every single script penned by another author. Not even his own writing escaped this draconian scrutiny. The problem, according to biographer Joel Engel, was that Roddenberry was great at laying out the broad strokes of the series, but when it came to writing individual episodes, he would say, in part, he basically couldn't write well enough to carry it off. A script never left Roddenberry's hands without becoming worse. Seeing some big similarities now between Star Trek and its longtime rival, Star Wars here. According to the 50-year mission by Edward Cross and Mark Altman, the Star Trek franchise flourished only when Roddenberry ceded creative control to other writers. For example, shortly after the premiere of the original series, Gene took a month-long vacation. Veteran TV author Gene L. Coon took over production duties, laying out many of the most beloved elements of the show, such as the friendship between Kirk and Spock, or the conflicts with the warrior-like Klingons. Coon also introduced the more warmth and humour to the dialogue. Actor William Shatner would later agree with this analysis, saying, Gene Coon had more to do with the infusion of life into Star Trek than any other single person. Unfortunately, it appears that Roddenberry could hold pretty petty resentments. Unhappy with Coon's growing influence, he opposed his every move until Coon left the show out of sheer frustration. He was replaced by other, less gifted co-showrunners, which eventually led to a decline in quality as of the third and final season. Star Trek may have closed down, but Gene was not out of work by any means. In 1971, he wrote and produced the sexploitation thriller Pretty Maids all in a row, followed by more sci-fi and horror pilots and TV movies such as Genesis 2, The Questor Tapes, and Spectre. Roddenberry also served in the Writers Guild Executive Council and was appointed Governor of the Academy of the Television Arts and Sciences. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, he garnered 3 honorary doctorates from Emerson, Union, and Clarkson colleges. All the while, Star Trek was growing into what could only be described as a cult phenomenon thanks to syndication, rallying thousands of devotees known as Trekkies or Trekkers. When NASA announced its first space shuttle program, the original name for the craft was Constitution, but Trekkies flooded the White House with their petition, prompting the president to rename the shuttle Enterprise in September 1976, which I think goes to show how, the level of pop culture saturation Star Trek had achieved at this point. Throughout the 1970s, Gene and Majel displayed another talent: marketing. They extensively toured Trekkie conventions, advertising novelizations of the original series and selling merchandise produced by the newly funded company Lincoln Enterprises. Roddenberry had also realised that Star Trek was a profitable intellectual property and could not let go of it. He attempted to resurrect the show as an animated series, but again, his limitations as a writer quickly became apparent. After 2 seasons of mixed reception, the series was quietly cancelled in 1975. But in the same year, Gene started yet another extramarital affair, this time with his executive assistant, Susan Sackett. According to Sackett, the relationship continued until his death. In parallel, the hyperactive Gene entered into talks with director Philip Kaufman to produce the Star Trek feature-length movie. Once again, Roddenberry could not tolerate competing creative talent. After endless fights, Kaufman abandoned the project. The next attempt in line was to produce another live-action series. Gene completed the Bible for the show and concept for the pilot episode in July 1977. The concept was picked up by Paramount. The producers loved the pitch and decided to ditch the plans for a series and turn the pilot into a theatrical movie instead. Paramount tasked veteran scriptwriter Howard Livingston to produce the first draft, which you can probably guess was extensively rewritten by Roddenberry later that year. In a later recollection by Livingston, Gene's version was not well received by the execs, stating, in part, "We all read it and I was appalled, and so was everybody else. We sat around looking at each other and somebody said, 'Who's going to tell him? It's a piece of After lengthy struggles with Livingston, Paramount and director Robert Wise, eventually Roddenberry's draft was ditched and he was credited as a producer. Despite mixed reviews, the film grossed 3 times its production budget, securing the production of several more movies, 5 of which were released during Roddenberry's lifetime. He will be credited as an executive consultant for the first 3. The continued success of the franchise prompted Paramount to announce the production of a new TV show, Star Trek The Next Generation, in October 1986. Roddenberry's involvement was, as usual, quite problematic. Hired as a producer for the first season, he brought along his attorney and business manager, Leonard Maislish. The two actively antagonised other producers, writers, and even the cast members. According to the already quoted Altman and Gross, the terrible duo used tactics such as verbal abuse, a shift to increasingly worse office spaces, being denied parking spaces, and worse, until their adversaries were fired or effectively forced to resign. Tension behind the scenes was lifted only when poor health limited Roddenberry's involvement with the show. As per a common trope, initial successes were followed by excesses, namely drugs and alcohol abuse. And this may have been the cause for a series of strokes which afflicted him in the early 1980s. As Gene faded into the background, Paramount hired showrunner Michael Piller, who is often credited for ensuring the success of TNG. Roddenberry's health continued to decline until September 1991, when his conditions worsened due to a blood clot. On October 24, 1991, while at his doctor's offices in Los Angeles, the legendary author suffered a cardiopulmonary arrest. He was immediately taken to Santa Monica Medical Center, but it was too late. Gene Roddenberry left that Earth for good at the age of 70. His remains were cremated, and in April 1997, part of his ashes were launched into Earth's orbit, a fitting end for a man who'd done so much to inspire science fiction and indeed real-life space exploration. Biographers and behind-the-scenes accounts published in recent years may have cast a shadow on Gene's private and professional conduct, which were undeniably problematic to say the least. What is also undeniable is that Roddenberry never backed down from a challenge, be it risking his life to save his passengers in the desert or jeopardising his livelihood to defend his vision and values. To conclude, in his own words, a man either lives as it happens to him, meets it head-on and licks it, or he turns his back on it and starts to wither away. So thank you for watching this episode of Biographics. As mentioned at the start, I've been your interim host, Carl Smallwood. Please check out the sister channels to Biographics, Geographics and Top Tens, no doubt linked below. If you like me or you want to see more of my work, you can find like Wiki Weekends, Facting with Carl Smallwood, or other social media links somewhere below, I imagine. And again, as noted at the start, this video is based on an original script by Arnoldo Teodorani. If they provided links for us to share, they will also be below. Thank you for watching. Let us know what your favourite Star Trek moment is in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, have the day you deserve. I guess I can end on like a little dumb fun fact. I think we covered this on my channel Fact Fiend, but I'll give you a Cliff Notes version at home if this gets left in. Like everyone knows like the Vulcan nerve pinch, right? Like the pew, like that. Vulcans do to like, incapacitate a human being or indeed any humanoid target. In the original script for the episode where that was introduced, it was going to be just a punch. Like just Spock was straight up going to just punch out Captain Kirk, because it's an episode where Kirk could be mind controlled or something. And Leonard Nimoy, showing a heroic amount of restraint, argued with producers against punching William Shatner in the face, and said instead that, well, the Vulcans are they're a people of like pure logic. Like violence seems like such a base emotion to fall back on. The Vulcans wouldn't do that. Surely they'd have a more dignified, logical way to incapacitate a humanoid target. And they just basically bullshitted the idea of the Vulcan nerve pinch and saying, oh yeah, maybe they're so strong, because the Vulcans are super strong, they can like grip like a part of your body, like basically like pressure point combat, and instantly incapacitate you that way. And I think in like Star Trek canon, they explain that like Vulcans have like their psychic mind meld thing. It's related to that. Of just saying, yeah, when the Vulcan nerve pinch doesn't actually hit a nerve, it's just what we understand it to be. It's like basically they just turn off your brain, which is terrifying. But yeah, that's a little bonus fact about Star Trek for you there. If you like, just yeah, I love the show, so it's always fun to share things about it. Cheers.